Hey there, friends, and welcome to the beginning of a brand new series here at Alive that we're calling Dollars and Cents. And today, I want to talk to you from the topic of show me the money. That's what we're going to talk about today. But I realize that some of us, we maybe don't love talking about money very much, and some of us love it. And we might have different relationships with talking about money, and I know I have at different points in my life had different ways of handling talks about money. But let me just tell you that the Bible here, money gets talked about a lot in Scripture. I mean, did you know that of Jesus's 38 parables that he tells, 16 of them deal with money? And did you know that more is said in the New Testament of the Bible about money than about heaven or hell combined? Did you know also that money is talked about 5 times more in the Bible than prayer? And did you know, one more little did you know that there are more than 500 verses on both prayer and faith in the Bible? 500. And there are more than over 2,000 verses that deal with money and possessions. So is that because God cares more about your and my money than he cares about prayer and faith and heaven and hell? Is that what it means? No. It's because I think of just how wide money influences our lives and affects all kinds of things like our prayers, our faith, and honestly, our eternal futures as well. See, money played a part in, just think about it, what you're wearing today. You know, you had to buy it, and somehow money afforded you the clothing that you chose to wear today, and how much of it you have in your closet to choose from to pick out what you're wearing today. Money, if you're at a home-style church watching this, affected how you got there, you know, the car that you drove and which one you got there, or if you're in your home right now, how, you know, what your home looks like, what home means to you. Money affected that choice and that reality of it. And money affects the lunch that you're going to have after this, whether you're going out to eat or getting some PB&J to happen there at your home. And so much more. Money just affects so much of our lives that we don't always see how much our money is reflecting deeper things, and also how much our money is shaping deeper things in us. But God does see that, and since he cares so much about those deeper things of our lives, that's why I think he says so many things, but also some pretty straightforward things about money. And let me just say here, as we get started in this series today, I just personally want you to know, I wish that the things that we're going to talk about, really practical things that we're going to talk about here in this series, we're going to give you some real practical application, because that's what I think is most important for us as we get into this. These are things that I just wish that I had heard maybe 10 to 20 years ago. I wish that I had gotten some of the things that we're going to get in this series 10 to 20 years ago. But you know what? No matter how old you and I are now, we all have something to gain from hearing what God says about dollars and cents. So today I want to focus in on the profound implications, the lessons that are learned from a story that Jesus once told, a parable that he told to a crowd of his followers in Matthew 25. We're going to jump in verse 14, and Jesus is just kind of mid-teaching. He says, again, the kingdom of heaven can be illustrated by the story of a man going on a long trip. So get the cookies, get the popcorn, get ready. It's story time. So a story of a man going on a long trip, he says. And Jesus says that this man called together his servants and entrusted his money to them while he was gone. He gave 5 bags of silver to one, 2 bags of silver to another, and 1 bag of silver to the last one, dividing it in proportion to their abilities. He then left on his trip. The servant who received the 5 bags of silver began to invest the money and earned 5 more. The servant with 2 bags of silver also went to work and earned 2 more. But the servant who received the 1 bag of silver dug a hole in the ground and hid the master's money. And after a long time, their master returned from his trip and called them to give an account of how they had used his money. The servant to whom he had entrusted 5 bags of silver came forward with 5 more and said, Master, you gave me 5 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned 5 more. The master was full of praise. Well done, he says, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together. Now the servant who had received the 2 bags of silver came forward and said, Master, you gave me 2 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned 2 more. The master said, "Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling the small amount, so now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together." Same thing he had said to the other guy, right? Well, then the servant with the 1 bag of silver came and said, "Master, I knew you were a harsh man, harvesting crops you didn't plant and gathering crops you didn't cultivate. I was afraid I would lose your money, so I hid it in the earth. Look, here is your money back." But the master replied, "You wicked and lazy servant. If you knew I harvested crops I didn't plant and gathered crops I didn't cultivate, why didn't you deposit my money in the bank? Like, why didn't you at least throw it in a savings account or a money market account and at least let it gain some interest? At least I could have gotten some interest on it," he says. Then he ordered, "Take the money from this servant and give it to the one with the 10 bags of silver. To those who use well what they are given, even more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who do nothing, even what little they have will be taken away. Now throw this useless servant into outer darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." Can we just take a moment before we jump into the content of today's message, and we just pray in light of what we just read? God, I just ask that you would help us to be those who use well what we are given. God, that even more will then be given to us, and that we will have then an abundance. And God, that we wouldn't be those who do nothing with it and therefore get it taken away from us. Help us to be those who use well what we've been given. Amen. Today, I want to talk about 4 simple realities that we see in this parable of Jesus's that will, if we let them, absolutely transform how we approach our money so that we can hopefully end up like the ones in the story that Jesus celebrated. Are you ready? Here's the first thing. The first reality. God owns it all. Now, the master of the story, in Jesus' story, the picture of God himself, distributes to these servants out of what he owns. So the servants aren't handling their self-made estates, but the money of their master, right? This is clear from the very beginning of the Bible that this is the reality of what we are, engaging in. When in Genesis, it shows us that God creates everything that there is and everything that there is around this earth that we're on. And then we later see in Scripture that the resources of our lives, even yours and mine, are ultimately given to us from God. So what we're dealing with here is stuff that is ultimately God's property. Now, I know this is pretty basic, but if that's the case, that this is all God's property, all of our money then is God's, all of our possessions are God's, then there are some simple and yet really important implications to this one reality. I think the first implication would simply be that God then has the right to whatever he wants, whenever he wants, right? Just think of it this way. Gas prices are pretty high. Everyone right now is talking about how high gas prices are. So let's imagine if we're in the car together and we're in the car together and you ask me to fill her up with the high-end gas, the really expensive kind right now, I'm gonna tell you you're crazy. I'm gonna tell you no, I don't think so, you're crazy. But what if the car in question, the car that you're asking me to fill up, is the car that you're letting me drive around? It's your car, you've loaned it to me, and you're the one allowing me to borrow your car. And you tell me to fill it up with the high-end stuff, I'm gonna say yes indeed. And would you also like me to squeegee the window, or should we take it to the actual car wash right now? Because I mean, if it's your car, you get that decision that you're in, right? If we see what we own or what we used to own or what we could own in the future as all of it ultimately God's, well then that changes things. He gets to have a lot more say than we do in the decision making. So it's his instructions, his wisdom that have to matter more than what makes sense to us. It truly has to be that we trust in the Lord rather than leaning on our own understanding of money and how to handle it. That we acknowledge him in all of our financial ways and know that he'll then make our paths straight. It's his stuff, his money, his possessions ultimately. So it's his call ultimately what gets done with it. And that leads to another important implication of this simple reality that God owns it all. And that's that every financial decision that I make, is spiritual. Not just how much you or I give to church or to a charity, or how much we spend sponsoring a child in some program, or how much we hand off to a homeless person, or how much we give to a crisis pregnancy center, or to some other World Help Relief organization, or whatever it might be. However much we save or spend, every financial decision has spiritual significance. Think of it this way. Imagine someone asks you to go ahead and dog sit for them for a week, okay? They need you to feed and clean up after the dog while they're away, and the dog has a special diet, special food that they need to eat. And you do that. But you also, without their permission or them knowing, you get the dog's tail docked and the hair trimmed how short you wanted it to be, and you get paid by a breeder to go ahead and breed their dog. And then, in fact, you also take their dog to an underground dog fighting ring to see how much money you can make off that. Now, if at the end of the week, you present the dog to the person that had you dog sit, and you tell them everything that you did with their dog, including that you really highlight the fact that you gave them the special food that they had made sure to tell you to give the dog. So you did that. Do you think they're going to look at you and say, "Well done, good and faithful friend"? Or do you think that they might just say some things that I can't quite say here in a sermon, right? So hear me out here. God wants you to be generous. He wants you to tithe and return that 10% of your income back to Him as a way of worshiping Him. He wants you to help to feed and clothe the poor. But He still wants you to acknowledge Him and worship Him with how you handle the rest of the 90% too. See, obedience to the basic instructions is important, but caring for Him and His desires should impact how we handle the rest too. Because not only does this parable of Jesus' show us something about God as a master, but it shows us something about ourselves as His servants or stewards as well. So let's get to the second reality from this parable, and that is we're called to steward. It's pretty simple. Jesus gives the master in this story 3 different stewards or managers. Because a steward is basically somebody who's been entrusted with somebody else's wealth or property and is in charge of responsibly managing that other person's wealth and property with that owner's best interest in mind. Okay, that's a good definition for us today. The aim of a steward then is simply to be faithful to the desires of the one doing the entrusting. 1 Corinthians 4:2 even says this. Moreover, it is required of stewards that they be found faithful. So I want you to imagine that you hire a financial expert to handle your retirement, and then you find out that they went ahead and cashed out all of the earnings up to a certain couple years in to go ahead and pay for a nice new car for themselves. You'd be upset, right? Why? Because they use your resources for their best interest rather than yours, even though you put them in management over your resources to help you out. That's that whole them doing it selfishly for themselves, that's not how it works to be a steward of someone else's resources. That's why when it comes to how you and I handle God's money that He's let us have, we really should be more focused on our delegated responsibilities than our desired rights. We're responsible to love the Lord, to listen to Him, and to use our heart, soul, body, mind, strength, and our resources to bring worship to Him. Each and every God-given resource that we have, any sort of say over in our lives, is meant to ultimately be used for the accomplishment of God-given goals. We see this from the very beginning where Adam and Eve are put in the garden and God goes, okay, here's what I need you to do. And He gives them management responsibilities to steward and care for the garden. He's telling them what He wants. So I want you to understand that stewardship isn't just a subcategory then of the Christian life. Like this is just a part of what it looks like to do. No, like stewardship is actually the definition of the Christian life. Everything we have, everything we are is meant to be stewarded to go ahead and bring honor to glory. Money is just one area of responsibility, but it's such a basic area that, as we'll see later in this series, Jesus is basically like, well, why should God entrust you with real responsibility of things that really matter if you can't handle the responsibility of money? Jesus Himself says that. So as much as money can be a difficult area for some of us, and I get that, it is really God's training grounds for entrusting us with things way more valuable than just money or stuff. So let's get incredibly practical here. You guys ready? How can you steward something? Let me ask you this question. How can you steward something that you haven't assessed? Like you don't know what it is. Think of it this way. If someone randomly, you were in Chuck E. Cheese's for whatever reason, and somebody randomly walks up to you and says, hey, here's $500 if you can keep an eye on my kids for the next hour while I'm gone, and then walks out. First of all, that's weird. But you kind of need to know some things, right? Like, wait, hold on a second. How many kids do you have? And which ones are they? And do they have any special needs? Like, if you're supposed to steward and care for those kids, you need to know, because it's hard to steward something that's a complete mystery to you, right? That's why it's so appropriate for us to take into our consideration today Proverbs 27:23-27 that says, know well the condition of your flocks, and give attention to your herds. For riches do not last forever, and does a crown endure to all generations? When the grass is gone and the new growth appears, and the vegetation of the mountains is gathered, the lambs will provide your clothing, and the goats the price of a field. There will be enough goat's milk for your food, for the food of your household, and maintenance for your girls. The idea there, poetically, is the idea of, like, if you take care of those things, then you get those other rewards because you knew what you were working with and you took care of it. So I want you and I to today practically take stock of your flock. It's not about necessarily casting judgment on what you should have done with your money, but I want you and I to look back at the last 30 days. So I know you're watching this online or in your home style church group. Here's what I want you to do. We want you to go from today, 30 days back, and take stock of your flock. Where have you spent your money? How have you spent your money? How have you invested? How much have you brought in? What has the last month of your life looked like? This isn't about, again, casting judgment on what you should have done as much as it is just seeing where you currently are and what you currently do with your money, getting a reality. This exercise of just looking back 30 days and getting into all the details offers the incredibly valuable asset of clarity. We can then see what is there. The water isn't murky and impossible to see through. You can see everything in there. When you figure out where you are, it's often easier to then better see where you want to go. So, what are you currently working to bring in? How much are you giving to the church? How much are you currently giving to global missions, to charitable organizations? How much are you currently, and have you been currently in the last 30 days, investing into the flourishing of great organizations like Target, Starbucks, or Amazon? This is what you're going to see. You're going to see how your money is really being used. And I'm telling you, so many of our financial problems come from such a silly ignorance that we don't know where our money's going, as if there wasn't really a great, easy trail to follow. We can look back and go, that's where it's going. Now, I think that this, in and of itself, doesn't change anything about our future stewarding. It doesn't. It's just looking back. But it sure does help to know. So you and I were called to steward. And as a steward, you need to know what you've been given. You need to know what you've done with it, and you need to know what you should do with it. We'll get more into this later in the series, but I still want to just real quickly say that the main goal for God is that we use our resources to invest into things that are eternal. So let me just look at a portion of a familiar passage we're going to look at later in the series where Jesus says, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Let's go back to Chuck E. Cheese's real quick as an example. Now, if you were in there and you saw a kid that was saving up their tokens, all their tickets and all that kind of stuff, and they kept on getting their tickets and they were saving them up for one big special prize, and you saw another kid there that every time they got just enough tickets, they were immediately going over and they were exchanging them for those ridiculously overpriced candy. So instead of getting the big cool prize, they're just throwing it away at that stuff. Which one would you entrust with more? The one with the wisdom to think long term. And that's not just true with Chuck E. Cheese tickets, it's true with the greater investments of our lives, which is a pretty good lead into the third insight we gain from this parable, which is investment matters more than the amount. When you look at verse 21 and 23, the words that are spoken to the steward who was given the 5 bags of silver and the one that was given the 2 bags of silver, here's what it said. Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling the small amount, so now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together. It's the exact same thing. The first one had started off with more and was able to give the master more in return. But that didn't matter. It wasn't the amount that mattered. It was the investment. I see way too many of us getting hung up on the amounts rather than the principles. We sometimes say, oh, I'll do this once I have this. I'll be like this once I have more. Instead of learning the principle of generosity now, we think we'll practice it when we're better off later. Instead of really managing the rest of our money well now, we think we'll take it more seriously later. Or we get too focused on the bags of other believers and looking at what they got. We compare our supplies to the supplies of someone else rather than just focusing on stewarding what we've got. It is way too easy for us to think that we just need more supplies in order to be more generous, more faithful, more worthy of being imitated by other people. No, it's not true. What we're doing now, good or bad, is a pretty good reflection of what we would do if we made multiple times more. Which is why Jesus says in Luke 16, one who is faithful in a very little is also faithful in much. And one who is dishonest in a very little is also dishonest in much. See, today's decisions compound tomorrow's rewards or regrets. So what if you and I just focus then on being faithful with what we have right now? If you want to be entrusted with more, that might be one of your best strategies. Because God wants to have us be a pipeline of blessing and care to others in the world and in our church. He wants us to be a pipeline. If God can't expect you, though, to be faithful or generous with your current cash flow, why should He give you more to handle in the same exact way? I mean, if a pipe is clogged, you don't just shove more down it. So we got to stop getting hung up on how much or how little we're working with and instead focus on working with it well. Which gets us to our fourth and final realization from this parable as we talk about what it looks like to show me the money. Let me just tell you this. What you do matters more than what you know. In verse 24 and 27, it said, the servant with the one bag of silver came and said, Master, I knew you were a harsh man, harvesting crops you didn't plant and all this kind of stuff. I knew all these things. I was afraid I'd lose your money, so I hid it in the earth. Look, here's your money back. But the master replied, you wicked and lazy servant, if you knew I harvested crops I didn't plant and gathered crops I didn't cultivate, why didn't you deposit my money in the bank? At least I could have gotten some interest on it. Here's what I need you to realize. The servant knew, but that didn't matter if he didn't do the right thing with what he knew. Some of us, as we go through this series, it needs to be time that we just move. We decide we're moving from knowing and increasing our knowing about what it would look like to handle money God's way, and we need to actually make it happen. Faith needs to lead to some action, because one day, you and I are going to give an account to God, not for what we believed about Him, but what we did for Him. That's more than just our money, okay? That's more than just our money, but that's absolutely including our money as well, okay? We can try the third servant's approach in that moment by telling God all the stuff that we believed about Him. He'll want to know, though, what we did with it. And He made clear some of His basic goals for what He wants to see. In 1 Timothy 6, where it says, as for the rich in this present age, charge them not to be haughty, so not prideful, nor to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. They are to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share, thus storing up treasure for themselves as a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of what is truly life. So I want to end today by prayerfully setting some goals, having you set some goals in the three most basic categories of our money. But I got to be super clear that these need to be God-inspired, or they shouldn't even be pursued, because the greatest value in wisely stewarding your money to accomplish financial goals is if those goals are actually the same ones that God has for your life. Because it's not really great to figure out how to wisely maneuver a canoe in the best way possible if you end up getting in a river that has a steep waterfall up ahead. So what goals does God have for these three main stewardship behaviors in your life? Spending, saving, and giving. I want you to take some time and write down some goals in those three different areas that God has. Maybe it's a change He wants you to make, an aim He wants you to have, or a vision He wants to give you for that. Because our aim at the end of the day is to get a well done, good and faithful servant. We know the day's coming. One day, the currency of our world isn't going to matter for anything. We know that at the end of the day, that is what's going to matter most. That judgment day, when God gives us judgment, it's going to matter the most. I want to share with you at the end here a C.S. Lewis quote from an essay he wrote, The World's Last Night, when he says, we have all encountered judgments or verdicts on ourselves in this life. Every now and then we discover what our fellow creatures really think of us. I don't, of course, mean what they tell us to our faces, that we usually have to discount. I'm thinking of what we sometimes overhear by accident or of the opinions about us which our neighbors or employees or subordinates unknowingly reveal in their actions, and of the terrible or lovely judgments artlessly betrayed by children or even animals. Such discoveries can be the bitterest or sweetest experiences we have. But of course, both the bitter and the sweet are limited by our doubt as to the wisdom of those who judge. We always hope that those who so clearly think us cowards or bullies are ignorant and malicious. We always fear that those who trust us or admire us are misled by partiality. I suppose the experience of the final judgment, which may break in upon us at any moment, will be like these little experiences, but magnified to the nth, for it will be infallible judgment. If it is favorable, we shall have no fear. If unfavorable, no hope that it is wrong. We shall not only believe, we shall know beyond doubt in every fiber of our appalled or delighted being, that as the judge has said, so we are. Neither more nor less nor other. We shall perhaps even realize that in some dim fashion, we could have known it all along. We shall know, and all creation will know too, our ancestors, our parents, our wives or husbands, our children, the unanswerable and by then self-evident truth about each will be known to all. And then this is the important part. We can, perhaps, train ourselves to ask more and more often how the thing with which we are saying or doing or failing to do at each moment will look when the irresistible light streams in upon it. That light which is so different from the light of this world, and yet, even now, we know just enough of it to take it into account. Women sometimes have the problem of trying to judge by artificial light how a dress will look by daylight. That is very like the problem all of us have, to dress our souls, not for the electric lights of this present world, but for the daylight of the next. The good dress is the one that will face that light, for that light will last longer. We've got to know, at the end of the day, who we're handling everything that we've been given for. That's how we dress for success, is knowing that at the end of the day, we're stewards who get to give an account of all the things that God has given to us and what we used and how we use them to bring glory to Him.